Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's PM Forum virtual event. My name's Rob Cowling. I'm Business Development Manager with Irwin Mitchell in Leeds, and I'm a member of the PM Forum Steering Committee in Yorkshire and Humber. Although this is our first regional event within the Yorkshire community, this is our 6th PM Forum session that we've done virtually, and we've been overwhelmed by the attendance. So thank you all for taking the time to dial into those that have preceded this session and of course today's. It'd be remiss of me not to say I hope you're all safe and well at this extremely trying and difficult and uncertain time. So please do look after yourselves and stay safe. I'm delighted that we have Nicky Denegri with us today. Nicky is a principal consultant and head of coaching at Kissing with Confidence. She's got a number of years working with individuals and teams to help them perform better and achieve high performance, and that's something that we're going to touch on today, looking at the various different social styles and the importance of versatility, so that us as a marketing and business development profession can get across our expertise and show real value add to our respective firms. We at Irwin Mitchell have had the privilege of working with Nicky and her team across some of their Rainmaker training program and also their team working skills. And I honestly can't recommend Nicky and her team highly enough. So I'm sure you'll enjoy today's session immensely. Just a couple of housekeeping bits before we get started. If anybody's got any questions for today, we've got a Q&A function, which you'll be able to find at the bottom of the screen if you hover over it. Please add your questions into there and we'll cover them off as part of the wrap up towards the end. Anybody who's got any technical issues, just select the chat function and post a message on there, and our technical support function will be able to help you with that. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Nicky. Nicky.
Hello, Rob. Thanks very much for that generous invitation. It's introduction, I should say. It's great to be here, and thank you for your invitation, and thanks those of you who've joined for your time. So today, as Rob says, is about the social style and versatility model and its use in building better relationships and strengthening those relationships and building better outcomes, getting better outcomes for yourself and other people that you work with. Now, quick bit of context. I think there's never been a better time to do something like this. For many of us, the nearest thing that we will have experienced in a work situation is 2007's crash. Functions like business development, marketing, and learning and development, which is my background, were the first to go then, and if we're being pragmatic and honest, they may be the first to go now. Talking to some of you before today's session, you told me, you know, we're often seen as drains on funds for the firms that we work with and blockers in terms of we're a bit of a computer says no function. And I think it's your job, or it's our job, to show that that's really not the case, and that that's very short-sighted, and that we add value, you know, in the longer term by what we bring in as opposed to what we take away from the bottom line short term. And we can do that in terms of what we talk about with our internal or external client base and how we talk about that. Now, another thing you told me about yourselves is that you're typically quite creative people, quite forward-looking, quite big picture, quite relationship focused. And you've got a client base that's typically quite practical, focused on the present moment or the past, looks at things at a micro rather than a macro level, and quite task focused. And under normal circumstances, that can create tension aplenty. But if you think about the situation we're in now, and if you haven't in the last 4 or 5 weeks experienced stress, anxiety, tension, worry, fear, you're not normal. But when we feel stress, we tend to do more of what is comfortable for us, and so it can really drive those tensions even further. And today's about giving you a route map out of that. And it's not about which of us is right or which of us is wrong in our approach. It's about appreciating and flexing to the differences in those. And I think Rob mentioned this, to make this session more interactive along the way, we'll do a couple of polls and we'll do the question and answer at the end. And between now and then, I'll have introduced you to the 4 styles, how to be more versatile, and tips for working well with others. So let's go. A quick word about social style and versatility as a behaviourally based model. It evolved, excuse me, it evolved from work that was started in World War II to identify leaders in the armed forces. Then it was taken out of that context into what make good salespeople. And then finally, its potential is identifying and becoming really good colleagues is what it's used for mainly now. And I've said once, and I'll say it several times, this is about our behaviours. It's not about your personality, you're a unique, different, special person. These are about our external do and say behaviours. And they have evolved to help us deal with tension. So, for example, I know that when I feel tension in a situation, one of my go-to behaviours can be trying to use humour to diffuse that tension for myself. And sometimes that's appropriate, and quite often it's not. So it's understanding what the difference is. And before I turn on to the first slide, I'm just going to give you a little sentence. I'm going to ask you to fill out the missing word. That when you were growing up, your mum or your dad or whoever it was who raised you, the wolves, whatever, they would have a little sentence. They would often say, treat others as would like to be treated. And that missing word was often, but always, you. Treat others as you would like to be treated. And the social style and versatility model says, please don't do that. Can you actually treat others as they would like to be treated? So finding out what that looks like. The 4 tenets about, knowing yourself, and that's what I'm going to give you through an introduction to the model. And each of the style behaviours has what's called backup behaviours that they go to when they're not getting their needs met. They're never helpful for themselves or others. That's what we need to control and replace them with something else, which is a growth behaviour. And once we know ourselves, our style pattern, what might trip us up in building relationships with other people, and we've got strategies to control that, we can then focus on understanding other people and doing something for them. Because the quickest way to get other people to do something for me is to start off by doing something for them in a way that makes sense to them. And you'll notice down at the bottom of that slide, we've got need, orientation, backup and growth. Both the bottom 2 I've mentioned before, backup and growth, but I'll tell you a little bit about what each style needs and what type of behaviours, i.e. the orientation, it tends to go towards. You'll see at the bottom, it says there are 2 dimensions, assertiveness and responsiveness. And behind me, I've got my flip chart. It's also blocking out the light from the window behind me, which is quite helpful. And I'm going to just unveil a little diagram. And if you've got a bit of pen and paper handy, grab those and draw what I've got on the flip chart, please. So style behaviour clusters along these 2 continuums. You've got ask and tell, assertive and control, and emote, responsiveness. Let me tell you a little bit about each of them. And think while I'm telling you about each of those, about the people that we ask you to consider, one of whom it's really easy for you to get along with and one of whom it's a bit more of a challenge to get along with. And I'll share an example of that with you myself. So, ask and tell assertiveness. This is how we try to influence people. And ask people tend to be more cautious and reserved about sharing their opinions when they're trying to influence you. And tell people tend to be much more assured and confident and forceful and direct when they're sharing them. They will make positive statements and declarations. They'll try and direct your actions. Ask assertive people tend to ask you questions and draw out what you're thinking. Now, because style is about say and do behaviour, if you're watching how they do those things, here are some clues. Ask assertive people tend to speak more slowly. They tend to use fewer words. They tend to speak more quietly. They lean back. They tend to use their hands in a bit more of a relaxed fashion, and they give you less eye contact. But tell assertive people, it's faster, it's louder, it's more. They use their hands in a more directive way. They're leaning forward, they're giving more eye contact. Now, what I'm going to do is put 3 little post-its on my flip chart to represent myself, the person I find it easy to get on with, the person I find it a bit more challenging, and I'm just going to place them along that continuum here in red. You don't know me, but maybe you picked up already. I tend to be more tell-assertive. I'm now going to plot the person who I find it easy to work with. They're also up there. They're quite tell-assertive people. The person who I find it a bit of a challenge, they're far away from me. They're much more ask assertive. Let me just give you a slide that summarises that. If you're reading that, have a look at that and use that to plot yourself, the person that's easy to get along with and the person that's more of a challenge to get along with on the continuum. Because this is starting to give us some really good qualitative information about where our challenges come from. Because the easier we find it to get on with someone, typically the more similar they are to us, or they're really flexing to us. Next, we're going to look at this one here, control and emote responsiveness. Now, responsiveness, in a nutshell, is about the way that we outwardly display our feelings and our emotions. If you are someone who's on the control end, then like one of my colleagues, you may have missed your calling as a professional poker player because you're really hard to read. Or maybe you're a bit more like me and you let it all hang out in terms of what you're feeling. So control people, if you think about their voice, first of all, it tends to be quite monotone. What they talk about are tasks and they describe them using data. With their bodies, they're quite rigid. They use their hands less often. Their faces tend not to move very much at all. But the emoting people, they talk about people, their voice is more inflected. They describe what they're saying in terms of opinions and ideas. Their faces move a lot. I've said to Rob that it's my life's work to try and keep my face under control because sometimes it shows you more than I would want it to. The body's, your body's quite relaxed and you use your hands more often. So I'll give you just a summary of that. And again, what I'm going to do is now move these little post-its around. I'm taking myself, going down towards emote. I'm taking the colleague who it's easy to get along with. They're down there as well. I'm taking the person who it's challenging to get along with. They are going up here. So what you'll notice is that in terms of the four styles, we're diametrically opposite one another. And it's a helpful rule of thumb to know that the further away somebody is in terms of their style profile, the harder it can be to get a really good rapport and a really easy way of working together. What I'm interested in doing, if I just go back a slide as you've thought about these, now let's see what's going on for us as an audience. So Katie's going to open up a poll which will tell us how many of you today are ask or tell assertive. So she's going to ask you that question. Can you please choose if you're ask or tell assertive? Fantastic. So I've put mine in. You already know that I'm tell assertive, and it usually takes about 30 seconds for the poll to number crunch and let us see what we've got in terms of the ask or tell mix across this webinar. And then we're going to do the same again actually for control or remote. Okay, so 65% of you are ask and 35% are more tell. Okay, fantastic, 65, 35. Thanks very much, Casey. And now, Casey, if you would open the poll number 2, which is around controlling and emoting. And what this is now going to tell you is which one of the 4 social styles that you fit into. And whilst we're waiting for the results of that, let me just tell you the names of the 4 social styles. We've got driving, there we go. We've got driving, expressive, amiable, and analytical. So we're just waiting again for the number crunching to come up. Okay, so this is interesting. So that's 73% of you who emote and 27% of you who control. So that's great. So straight away what I can see is that the bulk of people in this session are going to sit below the line, and you'll be able to look at the combination of ask and tell and control and emote for you. So without really knowing anything about it yet, we'll open our 3rd poll, and that will tell us what you have self-assessed as. Casey, if you could open poll number 3, please. And it's going to ask you to choose from driving, expressive, amiable, or analytical. So, if you remember back to the first slide, it said that each of the 4 styles has got a need, it's got an orientation, i.e. a behaviour that's going towards, it's got a backup thing that it uses when it's not getting what it wants, and it's got a growth area. Now, those of you who are self-assessing at the moment as drivers, what drivers need is results. Here we go. Okay, so we've got all 4 in our seminar. Fantastic. But by a country mile, we've got more amiables than anything else. And this, I think this is hugely informative in terms of the types of people that you're working with versus the styles that you've got. So if you're a driver, what you need is results. You like to take action. If you don't get what you need through your own or other people's activities, you tend to become a little bit impatient. You might become autocratic. You might take over. Your development area, your growth area is to listen. Expressives out there, hello, as a fellow expressive, what we need is personal approval. So it's please show us some appreciation and tell us what we're really good at. Behaviourally, we're quite spontaneous. We like to go to the things that's of interest to us. We have to be careful, because if we get really frustrated, our backup behaviour can be verbal attack. And that might just be expressing outwardly what's going on. It could be verbally attacking somebody else. It could be complaining. Our growth area is to rein in our behaviour and calm it down. Amiables, hello. The majority of the group that we've got so far, you are all about personal security. So expressives are saying, can you make me feel good about myself? But amiables are saying, hello, allow me to make you feel good about yourself and us and our relationship. They are busy building relationships most of the time. If they don't get what they need, if they feel that the relationship is going to be compromised, they will give in. If they're not being versatile, their growth area is just to take the lead. And analyticals, I think from memory, there were 10% of people on the webinar who are analytical. What you want is to get things right. So you need time to think. That's your key behaviour that we might notice that you're doing. If you don't get that time to think, you tend to disappear and go dark. And the analytical's key development growth need is to take the lead. Okay, I'm just going to show you a summary slide of that. I hope. There we go. So have a look at that. It's quite busy. I appreciate that. Does that sound like you? And when you look at what it tells you about the person that's easy to work with and the person that's more of a challenge to work with, does that sound like them too? So I'm an expressive. The person I find it easiest to work with when I was thinking about it is actually a colleague who's a fellow expressive. And then the person I was most challenged by was another colleague actually, who is very strongly analytical in their style. Now, the next slide that I'm going to show you gives you about 15 behaviours for each of the social styles. And those behaviours are, of course, not unique to that style, but they are the ones that that style uses most often. And they're listed from the ones that they use, which tend to be really helpful for them and other people, down to the things that they can do which are not so helpful for them or others. So I'm going to go on to that next slide, let you have a look at it, and remember to think about yourself and the easy and the challenging colleagues or contacts. Okay, so I've been practicing silence, not easy for an expressive, but that's to give you a little bit of time to redo that. And we are sending you some materials coming off the back of today, which has all of the slides that I've shown you so far, plus a few others to help deepen and broaden your understanding. Having looked at that, we would now like to ask you to vote again. Do you think you got it right the first time? Did you pop yourself in the right social style box? Casey will open the poll and we'll have a look at this again. I'm still the same. I was an expressive before. I'm still an expressive. I'm choosing that. Here we go. And before we move into versatility, whilst we're waiting for the poll results, you know, as you're looking at that, you start to understand why it is that if you don't have anything in common with a style in terms of its assertiveness or its responsiveness, because you're focusing on really different things, if you meet and you're both continuing to focus on the thing which is most important for you, that can absolutely set the scene. Okay, so we've had a little bit of an adjustment, so we're kind of equal numbers now, expressive and amiable. I think slightly more analytical than we had before. Driving is about the same. Okay, now what is really interesting is that from those of you who are online, what you told me absolutely mirrors what the small sample of you that I spoke to before the session told me about, which is, you know, on the bottom half of that grid, the one which is about relationship focus, excuse me, time is a flexible concept of your amiables and expressives. It's all about the people and relationship and having a little bit of fun whilst doing things really well. Those of you who are on the webinar who are analytical and driving, you know, much more task focused, time is a very fixed concept, and so, you know, if the bulk of your sort of client base that you're serving tends to be analytical and driving, for the majority of us on the webinar, that can present some real challenges. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move on to think about, okay, we understand what style is, where it comes from, what each is trying to achieve, and what behaviours we can see. Now let's have a think about versatility, and that is knowing others and doing something for others. Because if I'm coming to work with you, I'll have a look at what you're doing, I'll observe you over time. If I don't know you, I'll talk to people who do, I'll ask them to paint a pen picture of what you do, how you do it, and how you like to do things, so that I can use behaviours that make sense to you. So versatility is made up of 4 components. We don't have time to go into more depth on that today. But you can see that some of these things are more important than others. Now, you'll have noticed that I'm wearing a bright yellow dress. It picks up the colours in my wallpaper behind you. I can change the dress, I can't change the wallpaper. But I was saying to Rob earlier on that if I were going to work with one of my clients in the university sector, I could get away with wearing this dress. I absolutely could, because it's smart in terms of its cut and its fabric, but I would not wear this if I were going into work with some clients in a law or another professional services firm. So image is absolutely whether we're dressing for our own comfort or the comfort of others, but it's also things like our dress, our work area, and it's also, I think, really importantly, that thing about general demeanour. So you've probably seen the colleagues who've come on calls during COVID who are a bit down in the mouth, they're in a little bit of a bad mood, they're not really contributing very much, they're a bit snappy. It's an expression of their stress, but it's not necessarily very helpful for them or other people, especially other people. So it's how you look, but it's also how you are, and I think the general demeanour thing is really important. But we get over that quite quickly. And the next thing about presentation now, I could be hoist by my own petard because of course I'm in the middle of a presentation, but this is about, in a professional setting, are you clear? Do you have a beginning, a middle and an end? Are you alive to the nuances of who you've got in your audience? Are you, getting straight to the point for your drivers? Are you allowing a little bit of interaction for your amiables and your expressives? Are you following a very detailed agenda that the analyticals are going to like? And we try and do a little bit of that for everyone. And in terms of your presentation style, of course, it's natural to feel nervous. What's not normal is to feel completely in the grip of nerves to the point where you're overcome and can't do anything. Now, the third element is the biggest element of versatility, how you help others to get their jobs done. It's not whether or not you're good at your job. I'm going to assume that you are all very good at your job. And it's about whether you can persevere when times are tough, whether you're conscientious, do you start what you finish, are you flexible, are you willing to try different things out for people, do you remain optimistic? And actually the styles show optimism differently. It can be hard to know that your analytical colleagues are actually feeling optimistic because they tend not to let that show. Your driving colleagues just push on through. The expressives demonstrate their optimism by involving other people, going out, talking, networking, having lots of energy. And the amiables demonstrate their optimism by making sure that everyone's included and sounding people out and creating an environment that's very kind of calm and that people can come and talk to them about what's happening there. And the last thing, feedback. Feedback is about the extent to which you see having good interpersonal relationships as something that gets to the heart of what you are doing. And given that you are predominantly an amiable and an expressive group, this will be something that's really, really important to you. Last night I had a client call with one of the co-founders of their real estate asset management company and their chief operating officer. And what she said is, she knows that she's very low on the feedback score because she has a job that's about getting things done through other people, absolutely, but she has to be quite removed from them. She's very pleasant, she's very nice, but she gives away very, very little about herself, and she doesn't ask very much about other people and what's important to them. So for all of us, there are things in our versatility that we can ramp up depending on who it is that we're going to see and what the task at hand is. Okay. So thinking about if you are going to see, a colleague or a client, first of all, it's working out what their social style is. And then it's about understanding what you can expect from them when you actually get there. So I'm going to show you a slide that just summarises that. Have a look at this. This is busy. I appreciate that it's a busy slide. So I'm going to give you a couple of little case studies. And the first one actually involves somebody who is an analytical style, who was working with somebody who's an expressive like me. And what they said was, they ended up having a very good working relationship, but it took time, it took effort, and it took pain. Because initially they were each doing what felt comfortable for them. The analytical was focusing on process, on task, on detail, on structure, and being very, very sure about those things. And the expressive was going at projects as a big picture idea and lots of enthusiasm and lots of energy, but not much behind that in terms of having worked out how they would implement ideas for the project. And the analytical said to me, I realised that when we met the first time, they shared some ideas with me, and I immediately poured cold water. I immediately poured a cup of cold sick on it, actually. And what I didn't do was listen and engage and have fun and get them to tell me about their idea, their enthusiasm, their feelings, their passion. And I left that first meeting thinking, gosh, that had gone really terribly, really awfully. Because what she had done was arrive as an analytical, stay as an analytical, and leave as an analytical. And what she said is that by understanding over time that she was dealing with a raging expressive, they actually ended up having some of their best conversations when they would cross paths at the water cooler, because the expressive would have a bit of an idea. And what she said is, I understood that I needed to get on the rocket ship with him. And I absolutely love that as an expression. And that's what expressives do. They shoot for the sun, the moon, and the stars. And they don't want you to tell you why it can't be done. They want you to tell it why and how it absolutely can be done at the same time. Now, it may not always be possible, but it's about exploring those possibilities with them, creating some energy, appreciating their contribution, and then saying, okay, if that's where we want to go to and why we think it's a great idea, let me help you to work out what I can do that will take you there in a way that is planned and structured and organised. And they ended up having an absolutely fantastic working relationship. The second case study is somebody who is an amiable, who was working with a driving style. And because amiables are so famed for their kind of focus on their attention to and their ability to deal with and build relationships, this person said, I went into a meeting with somebody who very quickly became apparent was a driver. And rather than flexing to what they wanted and getting to the point and pushing through the agenda and ignoring my need for small talk and thinking we might be able to do that at the end, I stayed in that zone of trying to build the relationship first, much to the irritation of the driver. And the driver then went into backup style, and the amiable said, I came out of that meeting and I felt like roadkill. And that's often what amiables say about dealing with drivers. I feel like roadkill. I have been railroaded and run over because they need to get what they want at pace and in a way that makes sense to them. And what they realised, talking to colleagues of the driver, is that this is typical behaviour. They're always in a hurry. They want to get things done. When you arrive there, be ready to flex into focusing on what needs to be achieved. Remember, they won't do small talk. Don't worry about that. It's not an expression of dislike of you or what you're not bringing. It's just an expression of who they are. So get down to work. Be pragmatic, be prepared to push back, because driving styles, they love to test you, they love to have debate, and don't take that as an attack on you. Rather, take it as, this is great, this is an expression of them wanting to work together and get things done with me. And of course, just as the amiable was flexing for the driver, and just as the analytical was flexing for the expressive, if you do enough of that for them, that starts to create reciprocity. I love the work of Robert Cialdini, who looks at secrets to influence and persuade. In fact, his book, 50 Ways to Influence and Persuade, has recently been updated to 60 Ways to Influence and Persuade. And one of them is about creating likability, smiling and being friendly when you meet people, but also talking in terms of their interests and getting down to what their interests are. So over time, the analytical noticed that the expressive was a little bit more planned and organised when they sat down to talk about things. If they were working remotely, as they sometimes were, the expressive would be at the computer, they'd have the documents they needed open, they would be willing to look through those step by step when that was needed. And they were able to start off that call by saying, hello, how are you? To the analytical, and remembering that was about enough that the analytical needed. And the analytical was able to flex by saying, I'm fine, how are you? So they're doing something for each other and then doing small talk at the end. So it creates reciprocity, which is another Cialdini term. And then thinking about the amiable and the driving, what they realise is that this driving person is not somebody who is ever going to share lots of personal information with them, but that over time, what they would do is share more information about their worries, about their business, about their teams, about their people, and ask for the amiable to help. How can I communicate my anxieties in a way that doesn't leave people feeling too bruised, that gets them engaged with me? And the expression of trust came through that, rather than being great buddies. So how we understand what a really good relationship looks like can still be different for us in terms of the information that we're getting, but it's about the effect of that for one another. And both those amiable driver and analytical expressive styles managed to work together really productively and, importantly, enjoyably for the remainder of their working time together. Now, I'm going to go on to the next slide in a second, which is about things that we can do for the other styles if we are going to go and work for them. Because, you know, I've told you what behaviour to anticipate because of what the person wants. And okay, yes, you know, give your driver conclusions and actions. That's absolutely fine, and use your time to be efficient. Yes, because, you know, time is a fixed concept for a driver. But I want to give you something that breaks it down even further and gives you half a dozen hints and tips about dealing with each. And the beauty of this, as you're reading through these, is to think about it in this way. When I look at the person that it's easy for me to get on with, you know, how many things can I tick off from that list that are already happening, and that these are the secrets of our success. And then do a little bit of an audit in terms of the people who I find it more of a challenge. Which of the things on that list am I not doing? And quite often we can find that we're not doing almost all of them. So as an expressive, I look at this and I think about one of my analytical colleagues, and I can think, yeah, great. Number 3 is a really handy tip for me. When I ask them a question, I'll count to 10. In fact, sometimes I'll count to 15 and give them time. And that also fits in with number 6. Give them space to tell me what they are thinking. If I'm, as an expressive, if I'm going to work with a driver, I can think, okay, what I need to do is pay particular attention to number 2. Stick to the facts. Because they don't like me dealing in generalities or maybes and ifs and approximations. They really want factual information. And I mentioned the time thing already, but I've understood that with driving and analytical, if I'm doing a Zoom call, I'll be on the call 2 or 3 minutes before the official start time, because quite often they're there as well. And even if they're not, they arrive, they might even be late, but they'd still expect me to be there, especially the driver. If I am working with an amiable, you know, one of the things that I've learned from that is, you know, number 5 is really important for me. I think about a couple of my amiable colleagues. We've learned to be more robust in the giving and the receiving of feedback with one another. But whereas I would quite happily have a kind of chat about what's happened, whether it's gone well or whether it hasn't, in the open plan office, they would prefer that I do that privately. And politeness is everything, because one of the things about those of you who are amiable is that you will know it will take you a long time to get angry or to get angry about something, and you're very forgiving, but it can take a long time for that forgiveness to come into play. So a long time to show you're angry, a long time to actually give forgiveness. So what we're getting to then is we've had the 4 styles, they're what they need, what they tend to do, where they go if they're not getting whatever it is that they want, they go into the backup behaviour and their growth areas. We've thought about the behaviours that each style most typically displays. Remember, they are not unique to you in your style, but they are the ones that you use most often. They are your go-to. What feels comfortable to me? Why wouldn't I do it? Because I feel comfortable. But then we've got back to remembering that it's not just about knowing ourselves and controlling ourselves. It's about knowing and understanding others. So at work, under normal circumstances, we have plenty of time to see people's behaviour in the work environment. Right now, we're seeing that through the lens of Zoom. You might have to do a little bit more diligence if you're thinking about talking to people, what they're going to need and want from me. And you've thought about how you can flex to each of the styles using a range of the quick tip behaviours here, and also anything else that you find, particularly helpful from your own experience in dealing with people. And the reason why we would want to pay particular attention to this stuff right now is that we've probably never been as stressed, fearful, worried or anxious as we have at any other time, or few other times in our lives. Some of you will be enjoying it, but most of you will be having real fluctuations of emotion around it. So it's to stop ourselves from going into our unhelpful backup behaviours that damage our relationship with others and our, if you like, our brand and our reputation that we have with others too. And it's to make life easier for the people who are around us. We could spend a morning, we could spend an afternoon, we could spend a whole day on style and versatility and thinking about exactly where you sit within the 4 quadrants that I introduced you to earlier on. But what I hope is that this has given you a really nice sort of big picture introduction to it, and that you're taking away something very practical that you can use with your colleagues now in times of COVID, and when we get back to work in normal times. I'd just like to finish by saying thanks very much for coming along this afternoon. You've seen my study. I'm really disappointed that I haven't seen any of your home environments, because as a naturally nosy expressive, I would have loved that. But c'est la vie. And what I'll now do is I'll hand back over to Rob if we want to take any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that, Nicky. I think that was a fascinating subject. Obviously, it's just touching at the very surface of a very detailed and complex piece that we could go on and on for, as you say, for an afternoon, a day, probably a week and a month, actually, quite frankly. But I think what's really interesting in there, from my perspective, having been through this with you and your team, is that kind of piece around how you deal with other social styles and how you get out of those sessions what we're looking for as BD and marketing professionals, but doing it in a way that the fee earner or the client also feels a sense of achievement and gets out of it what they want as well. And the two very much match. And one of those examples that you gave linked to me personally, where I was dealing with the driver, and he is a difficult individual, but actually being able to put some of those tips in place has actually led to a really strong relationship that we've got now that we see mutual benefit from. So we've certainly, me personally, have certainly seen some benefits of putting this into practice and just spending the time really understanding the relationships that we hold as BD and marketing professionals and how we get even more out of them. And I think we've also been bringing that into our pitch scenario as well. So when we're pitching for work, that kind of coin phrase of best player plays, and actually using social styles and versatility is a really great way of identifying who the right people are in your teams to actually put forward to try and generate as much out of those relationships as we can, so that it presents long-term value and not just short-term. So again, it's just another great way where we as marketing and BD professionals can really showcase the value that we bring as a department and as a team and as individuals, to not only what we're doing sort of internally in terms of stakeholder support, but equally externally in terms of driving new client growth as well. So no, I thought it was a fascinating session, Nicky, and thanks for taking the time to run us through that. I know typically we would have done that face to face, and it would have been a lot more interactive, and we would have had people set up into groups. So we've had to slightly work with the conditions we've got, but I'm hoping that was a well worth session for a lot of us. We've got a couple of questions in, Nicky, which I'll address if you just want to take a stab at answering those. So we've had a question in where, as a supplier, so it's coming from one of our consultants, it's always our responsibility to adopt a flexible approach, more so than necessarily the client. Mm-hmm. So should we ever have an open conversation and recognise these styles as part of that process? I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Nicky.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, that sounds like a great idea to me, because the more that you know about how one another likes to work, the better you can help them. And I absolutely take that point about, you know, we often as a supplier are much more kind of flexible, thinking about what I can do for you, in the hope, in the anticipation that we'll get something back. But yes, you know, you think about when you're pitching for work, inevitably one of the questions that comes up is, you know, how do you like your suppliers to deal with you? What are the things that annoy you? What hacks you off? What must we never do? What must we always do? And I think if you can give whoever you're working with information that puts it through the lens of social style, you know, it's really useful information. Why would you withhold that from them? So absolutely.
I suppose the second question linked to that is, often some of these managers and colleagues that we're dealing with who often show unhelpful sort of backup behaviours, that can often demotivate a lot of us rather than actually help drive high performance. So have you got any tips around how you deal with managers and colleagues who are showing some of those unhelpful backup behaviours?
Well, as an expressive, and you know, we saw that we had a multitude of expressives and amiables, the people who are typically more relationship focused straight off. But if I'm seeing those backup behaviours, it's a sign to me that something's going on that's not okay for that person. So even a simple "how are you?" "what's happening?" You know, can be helpful in opening up that conversation about something not going wrong. And I think if you are dealing with, say, drivers and analyticals, you can use it as a platform for some feedback about the process, the outcomes, the project, what's working and what's not working. Because remembering that you know, analyticals and drivers are typically less willing to engage in conversations about how they're feeling and personal information straight off, and they would rather keep it, you know, professional in the sense of the task. So if you can come at it through that, and I think it's always an interesting question, isn't it, about at what point might I say to somebody, you know, your behaviour is essentially something that I'm finding quite objectionable. Do we ever get the opportunity to do that? And we know in reality that sometimes, or quite often, we don't get that opportunity. What I do quite often is say to people, can I give you some information about, you know, what would be helpful for me when we're working together, and describe that to them in a way that they go, okay, well, if I know that that's helpful, I can make a choice to do that. Whereas if I tell you, please don't do that, please stop that, you might not know what to do instead.
And I suppose what you're saying there really plays to the current situation. And you touched on it at the start of this session, which is that we are in a completely uncertain and kind of unprecedented times where actually, given the bulk of us sitting that kind of expressive, amiable space, that actually our personality traits really play to the current environment. And so I'd be interested to get your thoughts in terms of how marketing and BD can almost take advantage of the situation we're in now and even play an even more important and crucial role to our businesses and to some of those external relationships we hold.
I mean, if I've understood that question correctly, Rob, you know, there's something about, you know, right now we are typically speaking to people, well, we're speaking to people, they're always at home, of course they are, and you're invited into people's home in a way that invites kind of vulnerability, personal disclosure in a way that's never happened before. I was on a call yesterday with someone, and I know she's a very hard driver. And she said, the thing I've noticed though is that everything is a little bit softer in terms of how people are dealing with it. And voices are softer, pace is a little bit. So we're talking a little bit more about, I really like those lamps behind you in that wallpaper. You know, so, you know, our natural predisposition to building relationships can be more helpful right now, because unless you have a client like one I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, who was in her home office, and it very much looked like a work office, you know, very impersonal, filing cabinet. She's wearing a white crisp blouse, a black jacket. The only thing that kind of spoiled that was the cat jumping up and sleeping on the filing cabinet. But you know, she definitely just wanted to get down to talking about work, whereas most everybody else that I've spoken to wants to have a conversation about how they are, how they're finding it, how their staff are they having problems with, I don't know, supply chain or well-being or whatever it might be. So if I've understood you right, it's about harnessing our natural proclivities towards relationship building and emphasising those, but also about taking the signal from people, as with that client, that she doesn't want to go there. And that's all right.
Yeah, I think we're naturally more empathetic people, aren't we? And we're more relationship driven. And now is a great time for us to be utilising those skill sets to harness the relationships to help some of our clients get through the situations that they're currently finding themselves in, and showing support and direction.
Yes.
So that when they come out of the other end of this, we're in a really strong position, both individually and as respective firms, but equally for some of our internal stakeholders who don't have some of those personality traits, is actually building some of those traits into their style so that they can be versatile.
Yes.
to support their client base now.
I ran a session yesterday about the business development meeting. I know you've been through that yourself, you know, and one of the first things we look at is, you know, it's great to go in with a sense of what we're trying to achieve here. And, you know, internally, you just call that a meeting. It's a meeting where you're trying to influence and persuade, as opposed to use the word sell. Great to have a sense of what the outcomes are, but we need to go in there understanding that sometimes our natural style preferences will want us to run too hard at the outcome, if that makes sense. And we talked a lot about the elasticity of those meetings, insofar as if you've got half an hour, you know, how long are you going to make small talk for? You know, funny, because then literally come back and think, well, okay, half an hour, let me divide that into units of 4, because there's 4 stages of the meeting, in which case I'll spend 7.5 minutes doing small talk, if that's what the other person is. And the answer is, of course, you do it for as long as the other person wants. And if that's 29 minutes of small talk and personal stuff, because it only takes you 30 seconds to ask for what you need, that's absolutely fine. So I completely agree that it's almost a little note to self, isn't it? Which is that if I'm a more task and process focused person, an outcome focused person, I have to sit on my desire to really go for those things. In fact, I wish I had it to hand, but I was on a call a couple of days ago with a client, and so the call started at 3 o'clock. I'll see if I can remember this. From 3 o'clock to 3:24, we did small talk. And now, as an expressive, I like small talk, but by about 3:10, I'd been thinking I wouldn't mind talking about the thing we need to talk about, okay? And this is somebody, she's a partner in finance and banking at her firm. She's very, very nice. I mean, I think she's probably an amiable, but with very high versatility, because she's very commercially savvy, and, you know, had her best year ever last year. From 3:24 to 3:44, we talked about a piece of work that I did a couple of months ago. We talked generally about her firm and how you know, people were finding it. And then from 3:44 to 3:50, we talked about an event that she wants to run once the lockdown is over. And then from 3:50 to 3:56, we did more small talk. and I was sort of thinking, you know, I know she's busy. She's making contact with the other partners in her team at the moment, because they're doing appraisals. She's really good at checking in with people to see how they're doing. She's got a pile of fee earning work, and she'll still be thinking about doing business development. She didn't look at all hurried. She didn't see any rush at all to get to a conversation about work. So I was at one point almost sitting on my hands. And, you know, as I say, I'm an expressive, and I find that pretty easy. So I put myself in the shoes of a driver or an analytical, that can feel like agony, can't it? So absolutely, it's that thing about saying, okay, if it's as, you know, superficially simplistic as going to the checklist of what kind of behaviours can I expect, and what are some of the things that I can do to engage with them, even if I just remember to do 1 or 2 of those things with them, that's going to take me a lot further than going in and doing what I would normally do, and not demonstrating empathy and being very pragmatic.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a huge degree of science behind it, isn't there?
Yeah, and again, when we have, more time to talk about this, because inevitably in any group, you get people who are a little bit sceptical at best and cynical at worst about they go, well, you're just putting me into a box. That's absolutely not what this is designed to do. It's designed to say there's a category which applies to you, and it's allowing yourself to push beyond the boundaries of that category. But, I say that because people will often ask about, where did this come from? And if you are really interested in this, I would advise going away and Googling the 5-factor model. So this is a bit of work that was started in the 1960s, not by one person, but by a collective of psychologists working together, because they understood that, if I ask you to tell me about someone who you know well, Rob, you're going to describe them to me using behavioural descriptors, and that, there might be 10 descriptors for essentially the same thing. So their work was about identifying behaviours and describing that. And that is where social style and versatility models come from. And the interesting thing about the 5-factor model is that it's used now, with psychologists and also with scientists. There is that overlap. So it's really that lovely sort of synergy about what we kind of know intuitively about people, but also what we can prove scientifically when we look at things like the brain lighting up when we perform certain tasks and functions. So there absolutely is. And I would say, we have to say, well, there are lots of almost sort of formula in here about how we can approach things, but it's not turning up with a sort of a tick list about here are the 15 most common behaviours. I must expect these and I must use them in return. It's about allowing the kind of very strong scientific underpinning to and work with that intuitively and authentically.
Absolutely. Two other questions that we've had in, which are both really interesting. I know there was some kind of grids that you put on the presentation, but do you have any sort of quick tips to figure out kind of someone's style and how to adapt to build that rapport during an initial meeting or a conversation? Any sort of, what would be your top 5 tips for things to look out for to help you kind of position them?
Sure. Okay. So I think actually there's the things to look out for, and there's also the mindset thing, which is, going in and being open-minded, especially if you're meeting someone for the first time. They may be using behaviours that are not typically their style behaviours. So one of the things that we would say about style is that, if you observe someone over a period of time, if I followed you around at work for a week or a fortnight, I'd see you using a big range of behaviours. And then I would understand which of those behaviours you use most often. That's my kind of primary diagnostic tool, if you like. So suspending judgment, observing over time. I mentioned earlier on, if I don't know you, I'll try and find out somebody who does know you and get them to describe you to me. So I think, okay, I think I might be dealing with a driver here, And sometimes you can get a person's style behaviours immediately, and sometimes you need to observe them over time. But my own experience is that I'm pretty certain that I always get one of those dimensions. I can get either their ask or tell or their control or remote very, very quickly. And, I think it's about just even looking at the grid that had the most common behaviours, little thing about what are they doing, but also those 6 hints and tips about what is it that they want. And, at the start of any meeting or any Zoom phone call, I find asking somebody, where's a good place to start from your perspective? Where do you want to get to? And that can give me some signs about it as well. And if I think, they've told me where they want to start, but suddenly we're talking about the fact that their holiday in Portugal has been cancelled and they don't know if they're ever going to get that money back from British Airways or whatever. I'm probably talking to an expressive or an amiable here. But if I'm talking to somebody who just wants to get straight down to business, that's helpful. In fact, a live example from yesterday was I had a call with somebody in a client organisation. It was the first time that he and I had spoken at all. And my boss had said, he's a lovely chap, and he was delightful. But what I think was really interesting was we had a little bit of small talk about the job that he's doing in this organization and how long he's been there and things. And I noticed quite quickly that I was asking him questions and he would answer very nicely, but he wasn't reciprocating. And I'm thinking, okay, this is a subtle cue now that what he wants to do is move beyond the small talk. And I think absolutely fine. So that took him 5 minutes in total, which possibly felt quite a long time for him, but then get on to that. So it's a little bit of preparation. It's also about paying attention to what's happening in the moment.
Great. And just one final question, because I'm just conscious of time. What are your thoughts on, are those 4 styles strict, i.e. you fit in one box, or do you think there are some of us that are hybrids and can be in 2? So one of them question here was, can I be an analytical and an amiable at the same time?
Yeah, I'm going to just turn around. I'm going to just draw something on the flip chart that will demonstrate that. If you do the 360 feedback, you get a really specific sort of plotting position on your report. You get this good. So what I can say about myself is, so I'm an expressive, as you know already, but I sit nearer to that midline. So actually in the slides that I'll send to you, you'll notice that that box is the 4 of them. That's the box that is expressive but amiable. Okay, so I have a colleague, I think he's on this, and he's here. He's amiable with a bit of expressive. And how that plays out if he and I are in meetings is that he's absolutely fantastic at asking loads of questions and sitting with that kind of silence that comes from it to let the other person talk. Whereas and he's also talking more, a little bit more quietly and a little bit more slowly than I am. And that's really great because clients love him and he really uncovers their interest very quickly. I tend to fall into the trap of sometimes asking and answering the question. And then I've got another colleague. He's there. He's an expressive. In fact, I've got several of those colleagues. You can imagine when we all get together, it's pretty exhausting. But I did some work recently with a team and we had someone who was expressive, but nearer to the analytical. And how that manifests itself is, his colleagues would say, he's always got a brilliant memory for details and facts, because quite often expressors are all about the big picture, as I said earlier on. So you can absolutely be, a kind of a blend. It's almost like a primary and then a little bit of a backup.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nicky. Well, I think, look, let's draw today to a close. I think that's been really insightful and informative. Thank you, Nicky, for your time. Thanks to Casey and the team for setting that up. And thanks to everybody who's dialed in. When you close out with this, you'll get the option to provide some feedback. So please do that. It's helpful for future sessions. We'll circulate a copy of the recording and a copy of Nicky's slides, so you'll get them in due course. And we've got a couple of sessions coming up next week, which some of our other regional teams are delivering. So on Tuesday, we've got a piece around CRM, and on Thursday, we've got one around video and why now is a crucial part of should be a crucial part of your brand strategy. So please do look out for them and dial in and join us if you can. I know there are a couple of technical issues around the polling, so sorry to those who couldn't access them, but it was just to give a bit of context to today's discussion. So thanks again to everybody to dial in. Look after yourself, stay safe, and hopefully see you on another call soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.